You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Sean Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision-making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision-making in your life and business.
Where do you think is the most different place you've traveled to that's different from sort of your culture and experience here in Texas?
Qatar.
What was different about that?
Well, of course, English is not the primary language. It's a Muslim country. Their like social values are different. Their religious values are different. The language is different. The style of architecture is different. Food's different. Everything is different. Climate's different. I hated it.
You hated it?
Yeah, terrible.
What did you hate
Too
about
different.
it? Oh, it's
way too different. Some people love that. They're like, I want to go to the place that's totally different. No, I want to go to the place that's like mostly how my place is.
So I had an experience like that. I traveled to Tokyo. I was doing a speaking engagement.
That's way too
years
different.
ago. It was more different than I thought. Different. Is that it's almost opposite, not just different, but they drive on the opposite side of the road from us. But one of the things I noticed, we went to an office building, and in offices where we have here, everybody has their own either cubicle or private office.
Okay.
We went to an office, and the way they set it up there is they have the senior, it's all one room, and they have the most senior person at the end, and it goes to more senior to less senior as you kind of moved away from that person. I was like, oh, okay. All right. Well, that's different from how we do it. Opposite from how we do it. And then we went to dinner that evening. And at dinner, we go to, you go to whatever, Applebee's or Fridays, whatever it is. Everybody's in a big room.
That? Who's going to Applebee's?
Nobody's going to Applebee's. But we're all in a big room. You could kind of see everybody eating. We're all eating communally. Like everybody's together in the big restaurant. There, most of the restaurants have these sort of private places. There's a curtain you pull or a small, you're compartmentalized. And so their daily experience is almost opposite of ours, as they all work together and then eat separately, whereas we all work separately and eat together. And there were lots of examples like that. But it's kind of interesting.
Did you like it?
I didn't dislike it, but I just started noticing differences. There were bows rather than handshakes. There was a reference on handing a business card where we just kind of toss it at somebody. There was just almost everything was treated differently. And it was interesting because it makes you realize what you do. Because a lot of things you'll do are just instinctual or natural. But when you go someplace where it's different or opposite, you begin to realize and then question, how am I doing things? And why am I doing it a certain way? So it was really helpful. It was interesting.
Our guest today has experienced all types of different cultures that the world has to offer. Tom Turcich became the 10th person to walk around the world, and his dog Savannah became the first dog to ever do that as well. So he's got all types of stories from every corner of the globe, being held at knife point in Panama, gunpoint in Turkey, wandered the deserts of Peru, and watched a democracy fortify itself in Georgia. He has touched all 7 continents on foot, and he's here to talk about it. So we enjoyed the parallels between Tom's journey and the journey of entrepreneurs starting, building, and selling a company. So stick around. I think you're going to learn a lot. At the very least, you'll be entertained. I'm Sanger Smith with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. Tom, man, thanks for being here.
Sorry I was late.
Don't worry about it, man. It happens. So I've been trying to get my calves bigger in the gym, lifting weights. Does walking around the world do anything for calf growth?
Is that your plan?
My girlfriend misses my calves a lot. She met me when I was walking, and now I'm not walking 8 hours a day. So it feels like she never. Yeah.
You reel them in, you know.
That's it. That's what it was all for.
Yeah.
You know, Tom, anytime I've done something like that, whether, you know, getting married, writing a book, run a marathon, you know, and see if you had this same experience. There's a time where I think about, oh, that would be fun to do. That would be, you know, it goes from idea to a firm decision. Like, okay, now I'm going to do this. Did that happen for you on such a big goal as walking around the world?
I think there was a couple points. I will say very early on, after my friend Emery died, and I had the idea of walking around the world after seeing a few people who had done it before, I was very dead set on doing it. So in my mind, it was just a matter of time, even at that age. But I think when I turned 25, or the day before I was turning 25, I was still living with my parents, working, paying off loans. And I thought to myself, I can't do this forever. And so I needed my life to go one way or the other. And so I didn't have enough money saved, but I thought by my 26th birthday, I'm going to leave on this walk. And so I ended up leaving the day before my 26th birthday. But yeah, it got to the point where I just needed it to break one way or the other. And you can never be absolutely ready. And I was hoping I would get a sponsor by the time I reached Argentina. I was fortunate enough to get a sponsor before I even left. But yeah, really, once I decided I have 1 year and I'm going to leave, things kind of started falling into place more than they ever had.
Yeah, good little prefrontal cortex formation celebration walk there. Wait till I'm 26 and then I get the big move.
That's it.
I'm always curious about the money aspect of a journey like that. You know, whether it's, some people take like 8 weeks and bike across the United States. I'm like, man, how did you swing that? Oh, I want to walk across the United States. I'm like, that's a lot more difficult financially. Walking around the world for years, like that's just such a different ballpark. So I think that's one thing amongst many that would hold other people back who don't have your like pioneering spirit, right? You were willing to go and do it and not even know how you were going to pay for it. Whatever, I'll figure it out. I admire that so much. At the same time, like, dude, what are you thinking?
I get a lot of that from my dad, where it's just do the thing and deal with it later. Figure it out. You'll figure it out along the way. But the money actually is very cheap, you know, to walk around the world compared to living in a house or an apartment and in a city. You know, I'm just paying for food and the occasional hotel. And so I think the money was really, I think when you know what you want with a deep clarity and you know what you value, then the money in a certain way, you know, it's necessary. You have to have a certain amount of money, but I was willing to live on rice and beans for 2 years if that's what it took. And, you know, I wanted to adventure and I wanted to discover the world so badly that it didn't matter how I did it, and it didn't matter how I lived along the way. That was just part of the adventure. And so I think that is a part of the money aspect. And then the just setting out is, I think, a family thing. I think I get that from my dad, that sort of brazenness.
When you say you found a sponsor before you even left, like, what does that mean? Is that like a corporate sponsor, or just some people who are like really nice and want to support someone doing something awesome?
It was a little bit of both. I had a fundraiser at this makerspace nearby called the Factory Workers, and the owner of that built my car for me and then got some press for me on the local Philadelphia newspapers, Courier Post, Inquirer, all that. And then I had this fundraiser, and the newspaper articles were read by this local business owner, Bob Mehmet, who owns Philadelphia Sign, and their family happened to know my friend who passed away, and they were opening up an international branch. So it was just very fortunate. Things sort of aligned where, we're opening up this branch and we want someone to support, and we want a foundation to donate to. So they donate $1 a mile into my friend Emery and my other friend Shannon's memorial funds. And so it's just very fortunate that things sort of aligned and I was able to get the sponsor. And then I had this fundraiser to help me pay off the rest of my student loans.
Yeah, when you're doing something so big, like I think a lot of people who don't have that brazen attitude to say, I'm just going to figure it out. Like they get caught up with, well, how am I going to get this done? And on some level, like if you're aiming big enough, people are just going to show up because they're attracted to how incredible the mission is, how incredible the goal is.
Yeah, I think in a small town in particular, people are hopeful and they want people to succeed and they know you and maybe they've known you since you've been growing up and they're excited that you have this big dream. And I think in general, people are hopeful in that way. And then, yeah, as far as the details go, when your goal is big enough, the details just become little road bumps on the way of attempting your dream. And so each year, in my mind, when I was walking, I would set what I called a flag in the distance in my mind. I said, okay, I'm going to end up in Panama City. I don't know how I'm going to get there. And the roads I'm going to figure out along the way and the terrain I'm going to figure out along the way. But everything that I was solving was just a little bump. And so I'd cross these mountains, I'd walk through the jungle, I'd walk through the desert, and maybe a day was difficult, maybe a week was really difficult. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm making progress and I'm living my dream and I'm enjoying the journey. And every day it's another adventure.
I want to ask you about some of those difficulties, but I want to go back to something you were saying just a minute ago. When your friend Emery passed away, what connected that event, the tragic event, to walking around the world? Why not something else? Why was it that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was, for me, when Emery died, it was much less a sort of grief that I experienced. I did grieve and we were very close. We'd known each other since childhood, but it hit me at 17, this very formative age. And I had never been close to someone who died before. And of course I had thought about death, intellectually, but I had never really understood it. And when Emery died, I understood it. I felt its finality and how sudden it can happen. And so it pushed me into kind of like this philosophical crisis of how do I integrate the fact that I'm going to die and that it can happen at any moment. And eventually I saw Dead Poet Society, and that brought me out of the fog. Carpe diem, seize the day, all of that. And from there, I thought I would just do everything. And so I was signed up for the swim team again, and I signed up for a one-act play, and I was saying yes to everything. And then through that, I realized, oh no, it's not to make the most of life. It's not enough to do everything. You actually can't do everything, and you won't like doing everything. You have to decide on a direction. And so then to decide on a direction, I had to really reflect on what I valued and what I wanted out of my limited time here. And so when I thought about those things for months, it wasn't just this thought that I had and said, oh, I want to travel the world. It was these things I really reflected on. What do I want out of life? And I wanted to travel. I wanted to be forced into adventure because I was timid and introverted, and I wanted to grow out of that. And I wanted to understand the world. And with those things, with those three things in mind that I wanted to fulfill, I was searching for ways to travel. And because I was broke, I started searching for cheap ways to travel. And then I discovered Carl Bushby, who had walked around the world. And once I saw that, it said, that fulfills everything I want out of life. And then so that was it. That's what I aimed for. And everything else was just sort of waiting and secondary into achieving that aim.
So in a sense, there was an economic factor in that it was an affordable way to go as opposed to sailing around the world or something like that.
Oh yeah, man, if I had a boat, if I had grown up with a boat, I probably would have sailed around the world.
Hey, even biking, cycling around the world, the amount of money I spent just to cycle around Fort Worth, I can't imagine like looking for a bike shop in Morocco.
Yeah.
That's no fun
for sure.
Yeah. So, okay, I look at the map, the route that you took. You started California, went to the East Coast, and then you went back down through Central America, right?
So it was actually, that's a little confusing. So the end was actually Seattle to New Jersey, and I started from New Jersey down to Panama City. So that's actually the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was so confused when I saw that. I was like,
Why not take the straight shot down?
You need a better plan.
Jump on the PCT and south from Seattle down to Mexico.
Okay, that makes sense. So you didn't make any major crazy detours, but I'm sure you had to have had a detour at one point where you go, okay, I'll figure it out as I go along. And then you kind of like wait a little too long. You go, ooh, I should have figured out that there's this mountain range. I'm going to have to backtrack.
I don't want to hike through this jungle. I want to hike around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on a small scale, that would happen. I would definitely walk the wrong routes for maybe 10 miles, maybe a day, probably at most. And a lot of it is, the interesting thing about walking is that, well, first off, the route was decided by, I'm going to go back a little bit. The route was decided by, I wanted to hit every continent. And then how do I do that with as little visa trouble as possible? So that kind of forced my hand onto what countries I was going to walk.
Yeah.
That was decided in that way. But then on a smaller scale, the interesting thing about walking is that when you're walking into these new places, the change happens very gradually. So you actually have a good amount of time to figure out your route and the environment and how to camp and the language and all these little things. It's not like I'm just dropped off into Costa Rica or El Salvador or the desert of Peru and it comes out of nowhere. I would always see this very gradual change in terrain and know, okay, I had just walked through the plains or whatever. Maybe I'm ready for a change. And so I start looking for, okay, up ahead is where it's more forested. Or in Colombia and Ecuador, in the beginning of my second year, I was just pushing up and down mountains every day for months and months and months. And then I got to this breaking point where I could either follow the Andes in Peru or I could go along the coast where it's flatter. And so I said, all right, I just walked the mountains for months and months and months. Now I'm just going to go to where it's flat, even though it's a desert and it would be difficult. I'm just going to go where it's flat. And so you would have these detours, but it's so gradual. The walk is so gradual that it really didn't greatly impact things. And maybe I walk a day out of the way. What's that in 7 years,
Right. So I'm going to preface all this with, if you've run a marathon and you tell somebody you've run a marathon and they start talking about this little fun run they did one time and they try and compare those. Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm a runner too. I did a little 5K. So I did about 1,000 miles on the PCT a few years ago.
A 5K compared to going around the world.
Yeah, that's a fun run compared to what you did, right? You did like 26,000 miles or something.
Yeah.
Right? And so I have a lot of questions that I encountered along the way that I want to see how you handled those. And a lot of that logistical decision making when you're doing a long through hike, it's not like you're hiking campsite to campsite. It's dispersed hike. You're just finding a place. Hey, this looks like a good spot. I'm done for the day. Here it is. You're not even hiking on, though, a prescribed trail like the Pacific Crest or the Appalachian or, Continental Divide Trail or something like that. You're just sort of making your way. And a lot of those places aren't designed to have somebody camp on them. How are you dealing with finding the place to settle in? And did anything ever surprise you as you arrived on it and you thought it would work and it didn't? Oh,
all the time. Especially in the beginning, that happened all the time. I would camp in horrible places, places where there was too many mosquitoes, where it was in a divot and it would rain and then the tent would be soaked through, or it was too populated or too loud or whatever. There's a million things. And the first 4 months in particular, 5 months down the US was very painful trial and error in that way. And a lot of not great night sleeps. But in the beginning, I also, at a certain point, I realized, okay, if I give myself 2 hours before sundown, that was usually, and then I took the first decent camp spot that I found that would serve me pretty well. And so that's what I did in the beginning. But then as time went on, and especially over the years, as I had passed through more and more different countries of different density, of different geography, and of different cultures, of how late people stay out at night and how many people are walking around at night versus how quickly do they go inside early, like in the US. And so I got really good at just feeling out a place and knowing what I could get away with, in the sense of I could wait in some places right until sundown. And then I knew I could find a place to tuck away. In other places, I had to be a little more proactive and stop an hour early. If I was approaching a city, I'd have to stop before the city versus trying to walk through it or, get to the other side of it or whatever. So it's just this really, really gradual buildup of these small tricks and this small knowledge that over time makes it very easy. I mean, by the time I was in Turkey, which was, I guess, 5 years in, I had camped in so many different places, in so many different terrains, that I was really assured of my ability to find a place to sleep. And also you realize that no one really cares. Like no one cares if you sleep somewhere and they see you 99% of the time. It's if you're going to be found by maybe a shepherd or something, and it's the guy is just happy to see you and he's curious. What are you doing out here on this field where I walk every day and I never see anyone? And so for the most part, you realize you can kind of get away with a lot, as in camping out in the open much more. When you're first starting, you really feel the need to hide away.
Yeah. Did you find that the hazards were more human or natural? Like the troubles you had?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting question because I definitely believe, and I saw bore out that 99.9% of people are good and really just interested in going about their day, making some money, spending time with their family. But also there were some poignant moments on the walk where I encountered, someone more malicious was held up a gunpoint that actually wasn't malicious. It was scary, but wasn't malicious. And
wait, how is somebody holding you up at gunpoint not malicious?
They were plainclothes.
It seems
military.
malicious.
It does seem malicious. I thought it was malicious at the beginning. They were plainclothes military, and they thought I was a terrorist up in the mountains. And so just a big misunderstanding in a certain way. And it all worked out in the end. But the nature was probably it's tough. There were stretches, say like crossing the Andes from Chile to Peru, where I was on my own for 5 days up in the Altiplano at like 15,000 feet. And we came very close to running out of water, Savannah and I. And there was other stretches in the desert where you're going 3-4 days without any towns, without food and water. Or in Georgia, I got caught without proper winter gear, and that was really dangerous at night when I was up in the mountains, and could have had hypothermia or frostbite or something like that. So it's tough to say. There's a lot of little dangers, and it's sort of both. But I would say, with people are very good everywhere, I'd say.
Were you ever like worried about the police?
Yeah, definitely. In certain places, you had to bribe them. So in some countries, you had to bribe them just to move along. And in Mexico, it was the first country that I walked abroad, and I got scared a lot. I didn't have a great gauge of what makes a safe neighborhood and what doesn't. It's coming from America, which is so crazy wealthy, and from a middle class suburb in New Jersey.
Yeah.
I didn't have any gauge of what's safe and what's not, and people were always warning me not to trust everyone, not to trust anyone. And so even the police, I was like wary of, and who knows, I got through it, served me well in a certain way. But I think if I walked it now, I probably have more trust of the police, honestly. And later in the years, I definitely put my trust in them a lot of times.
How does that bribing the police go? Like, is it that overt to like, hey, Tom, you're going to need to give me $50 to let you go, or are they kind of hitting around?
Especially when there's got to be a language barrier some of these times.
And some of them, they usually just keep talking and they just hold you, and you're like, wait a second, like I'm here a little too long than I should be, and they're just waiting for $5 or whatever.
Waiting for you to bring it up.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Whoa, you just got to know.
Yeah, you figure it out after enough time.
Yeah.
You go, something is, they're holding you for nothing.
Do you ever haggle with them? You ever like, you slip them a $5 and they kind of go, dude, okay, 10?
I was very bummed one time I probably just won't name any countries, but where I basically gave the guy 20 because I didn't have any change. Yeah, I didn't have anything smaller than that. And I was very frustrated by that. I'll say that.
I remember one time we were in Morocco, and we were in Marrakesh. There's like, the town square, and there's a bunch of street entertainers, and they're always stopping you. They can tell clearly that we're not Moroccan, and they're trying to stop you to like, take a picture with this snake. Look at these guys with the drums, and look at the monkey. whatever. They just want you to take a picture with them and pay them money. I didn't know. I'm like 14 years old. So I would just stop at all of them because every single one was like, oh, come here. And I go, okay. And now I'm in a conversation and I can't get out of it. And they want to take a picture and boom. And so my dad was like, finally he like sees me get roped into one, take a picture with the snake guy or whatever. And they're like, oh, you got to give us money now. And he goes, oh, here you go. He like hands him his only, just what you did, the only bill he has. And I can tell he's pissed because it's like the equivalent of $20.
Yeah.
And these guys try to pull a fast one on him and are like, oh, this is nothing. This is like a nickel. This is nothing at all. This is worthless. And he was so done because he's like, man, F you. Like, I give you basically $20 for taking a freaking picture. Like, and now you're trying to screw me even more. And he's like yelling, cussing. We step away. My dad goes, all right, listen, Singer, I've raised you for 14 years to be nice and respectful of other people. In the next 3 days that we're here, I need you to freaking forget that.
Gotta be on the defensive.
Yeah. It costs me $20 every time we walk down the street.
I had a very, you get ripped off a lot as a tourist. You just pay the tourist tax. And those guys are pros. They know what they're doing. And I got ripped off real bad in Cusco, Peru. And then the next day, I went looking for a alpaca blanket. And I'm walking around all these shops and they have them hanging out and I'd feel them all. And I was like, this doesn't feel as soft as it should feel, I feel like. Finally, I find one that is just like air. It's so soft. So I tell the guy, I say, I want this one. He goes, okay. He pulls one off of the shelf. And no, I want this one hanging here. So he gets it. He folds it up. He turns his back. And like very slyly, he tries to swap it out. And I stop him again. I said, no. I want that one. And then he kind of looked at me like, all right, you got me. And so then he gave me that one. And I still have that blanket. And every time I look at it, I'm like, I finally earned my stripes. I'm out of the tourist, out of the tourist trap. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. The amount of blankets that people have that they think are alpaca blankets that aren't.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what's funny is like, we only know the times that we did. Most people only know the times you did get ripped off. Like, you don't often catch them. You find out later maybe that you did get ripped off, but the amount of times you've been ripped off and have no idea, endless.
Yeah.
Endless.
Oh, these aren't real Roman coins.
You find out later, 20 years later.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm sort of, I have no problem when I travel. Like, you pay the tourist tax. It is what it is, you know. That's just how it goes.
It's usually not a debilitating like scam.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're not like stealing my social security number. I'm paying for like a stupid bracelet.
You pay double or you pay triple. And you go, all right, well, it is what it is.
Okay. Yeah, I remember there was we were somewhere and there was some guy trying to sell you a knife. And I'm like, dude, we can't take that on the plane.
We didn't check bags.
We didn't check bags. So we're in backpacks. We've got these backpacks. I'm like, sir, we can't buy this knife from you. He's like, no, it's okay. I'm like, no, it's not okay. He goes, oh, yes, you can take it. I'm like, no, you can't.
You can't take it on
the plane. Take this knife on a plane.
And I'm probably there going, Dad, he said
we could.
Why would he lie to us?
And knives are so cool.
He knows what he's talking about and he has cool knives.
Yeah, oh yeah. It'll be no problem. You can take it on the plane. I'm like, yeah, right. Hey, so what was the worst, the most difficult part of the journey, just in terms of just not only the terrain, but just where, the kind of a low point emotionally, because you go through these highs and lows emotionally, right?
I would say emotionally, it was definitely Western Europe, weirdly, which was the easiest physical walking that I had had. But I had previously fallen really ill with a bacteria infection from South America that had just built up in me slowly, and it nearly killed me. I spent 6 months at home in and out of the hospital. I was in infectious disease in London at first. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I flew home and I ended up losing, I was down to, I lost like 45 pounds. So I was down to a little less than 120. Oh. And that is, from a very thin body that doesn't have 45 pounds to lose. And I was probably a month or two from dying, and antibiotics started to work finally. And once I was back to physical health, I picked up the walk in Europe. But I had been in so much pain for so long that all my thoughts had this dark sort of bend to them. That normal optimism that I carried with me and that peace that I really built up over my first 2 years of walking, of spending time with myself and what is basically like walking meditation every day, just from being with yourself and being with your thoughts. All that was covered up by all this pain, this really bad physical pain that I had been in for so many months. And so I was walking Western Europe and I was just miserable. Every day I would wake up and think, how can I possibly get through another day? And it's raining, I would be furious. If I went to a bakery in the morning and it was closed, I was like screaming at the sky. And I just had lost all that resiliency that I had built up. And so that was probably the lowest. And I kept thinking, man, like, what am I doing out here? I could be with my friends getting a beer on Friday night. I could be with my grandparents and my family on Sunday. I could be with everyone else and just with the people I loved. And I just kept having that thought over and over again. But then when I really played it out in my head of what it would be like to return, I knew how unsatisfied I would actually be, because I was already living my dream. I was living this thing that years before I had realized was aligned with my values, and that was fulfilled everything I wanted out of life. And I knew it was going to be difficult. Of course it's difficult. It's a 7-year journey and you're on your own and you're going through all these strange places and you're, stuff's going to go wrong. But then when I played out the alternative, it just was never viable. And so eventually, over enough time of walking, and actually was getting onto the Camino in Spain, where I had this community around me, that really brought me out of it. And then I was able to sort of think clearly again.
Yeah, because the Camino is a very communal hike. I mean, there's lots of community, there's lots of support, those types of things. So I hiked the Camino, probably 10 years ago. But I did it solo. I did the PCT solo. And the thing that came to me was I remember the general scenery, but there aren't specific sceneries that I really remember much. It was the people and the interactions that I had. I remember people I met.
The Camino is incredible for that. There's huge community.
Yeah. So how did you connect with people as you were going through that? You're going through that solo for 7 years. I would think that there are periods of profound loneliness, but I would think that there's also these high points where you're really connecting with people as you go through towns and different countries.
Yeah, absolutely. There was, I would say, a big difference between loneliness and solitude. I think there's a lot of solitude, and the loneliness would happen more when I was in a city and I didn't have the walking to occupy my day, and I would see all these people living their lives with family and friends. And that's when I would really feel lonely. It's like, I have nothing to do with my day. I'm just here recovering or waiting for something, whatever it is. So that's when I was lonely. When I was walking, it was much more solitude. And the solitude could be really nice. I loved it most of the time. And then with the connections, I would generally make deep connections when I would stop in a place, say for a month to get a visa or for some bureaucratic reason, or just because my family was there, I had relatives there or something like that. And that's when I'd build some really deep connections. And then when I'm passing through places, there's a lot of serendipitous kindness and interactions. And when you're just existing out in the world, you bump into other people. And so all over the world, I would meet someone who would pay for my meal at a restaurant, or a trucker that would stop and give me something. Or when I was in Bordeaux, these wine vendors took me in, and then I just ate with them and drank all these different wines, and they taught me about wine, and it was fantastic. Or attend a Turkish wedding when I stop in a village for chai midday. And so the interaction that I had, and I'm sure you experienced this, on the PCT, and that's why they call them trail angels, is that it seems to come out of nowhere. It seems to come out of the sky. But when you're existing out in the world, you interact with the world, and other people are out existing in the world. And so you get these really beautiful cross sections of someone else's life.
Oh yeah. I remember actually Sanger and I did a part of it together, and we came down off a mountain from a high point. We dropped down to the base of this mountain, and there's nothing around there except this guy who had brought with him 2 cases of sodas, and neither of us drank sodas, or sugared sodas. But I was, we were we were so happy to see this guy. So I started talking to him. I'm like, yeah, man, you're just out here in the middle of nowhere with, cases of soda. And he had driven 45 minutes to just be there to do that. It was so amazing. And there's just lots of stories about, I think you're right. We get scared about, strangers and, don't trust anybody, but those are some of the best interactions I've had on the trail is people who said, hey, let me give you a ride, or let me, here's some water, or go this way. That other way is blocked with construction, or whatever it is. It was just amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, of course you don't want to be naive and you have to have some sort of worldliness, but most people, they want to help, I would say, with the majority, and and most people are just going about their day, and I think there's a lot of like stranger danger that still exists in the zeitgeist or something.
When you first started, I imagine that how many miles did you go on day one?
I think it was like 15 miles, something like that.
Okay. So,
and I was so sore and cramped.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Like, I imagine right out of the gate, you're like, oh no, this is pain.
Wait, I can't do this.
But that goes away pretty quick. Like after a while, a couple of weeks, I'm guessing you're feeling like, oh yeah, I can do this.
Yeah, physical was like a month or so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Eventually, like it just becomes what you're doing. And it's not like, oh, I miss a hot shower anymore. It's just like, this is life.
Very much so.
Doing it for 7 years and then coming back to normal life. How difficult was that transition?
It was the only depression I've ever fallen into, I would say. And it was for a bunch of reasons. A lot of it was just because I didn't know what to do with myself. I had been walking 8 hours a day for years on end. And so I couldn't sit down in one place. I knew I wanted to write this memoir that's coming out in October, but I just couldn't sit down and write it. It was impossible. And that was very frustrating. And so Savannah and I would just walk like 4 hours a day, every day, just to do something, just to occupy myself. And the other thing that was really strange about it, which was more difficult, was that when I'm walking, the world is coming at me just by walking and just by fulfilling this small purpose every day, get another 24 miles down the road and find somewhere to sleep. Just by fulfilling that purpose, I'm trying new foods, I'm meeting new people, I'm seeing new terrain, I'm seeing a beautiful sunset, I'm probably seeing a beautiful sunrise, I'm getting physical exercise, I'm getting vitamin D, and I'm fulfilling all these different things. But then when I was in Seattle, which is where I moved to after the walk was over, the world wasn't coming at me. And I was just so confused as to why my days weren't so interesting anymore. And it took a while just to realize and then be proactive about, you need to go out into the world again. You need to be proactive about making things happen and meeting people and existing out in the world.
It's interesting that you say that. When I finished the Camino, which was about, 30 days of hiking, it was like 500 miles. And I get to Santiago, I'm standing in front of this cathedral. I finished the Camino, I'm done. And I had this same exact experience that you did, is that there was this sort of period of this feeling of sadness. Like, oh, well, now what? What do I do now? I was expecting that I would be celebrating that, I was like, oh, great. I was happy. Like you do when you finish a race or whatever. And I didn't at all. It was sort of what you described, is like, what now? So when you did that, you had this desire to write about it. Was there anything else you wanted to do when you say, okay, now what next? What was that feeling like?
Yeah, it was, I would say the first 3 months after I finished, I was basically on cloud 9. And then after that died off, that's when it became like,
yeah.
I had this thought 3 months after the walk was finished, that I was walking down the street and I just thought, oh, it's still going, in the sense of life. Like I had completed my purpose on Earth, but life kept going. And that was, very challenging to deal with. And I doubt I will ever have such a strong purpose as I had with the World Walk. And so then the same thing sort of happened when I was 17, and I thought about, okay, like what's next? And then what do I value? And I always I've enjoyed writing since after college, and I wrote all during the walk, and I wanted to tell the story. And so that was something that I wanted to do. And then the other thing was I had been hired for a couple public speaking events, like at Pinterest and then at Reed Smith pretty early on and after the walk. And I actually really enjoyed like putting those slides together and trying to distill what I learned from the walk. And then when I did those things, I found I was good at it and I actually really enjoy it. And I think if I had done it years before, I would have felt like such a fraud. It's like, who are you to get up there on stage and talk about anything? Mm-hmm. And now I get up there and I go, oh no, I believe in all these things. And I think they are valuable things to make people happier and more productive and more efficient in a certain way. And so I really enjoyed that. And so I think I was sort of fortunate that I was able to get those few speaking events right after the walk and sort of find, something that brings me some joy and I feel does some good in the world.
Yeah. I see so many parallels between your story and most entrepreneurs' life story is they embark out on this massive goal. And as long as the objective is clear, I don't have to know every step of the journey before I start, but starting is key. And a lot of people will never start a company because they don't know what every single step is going to be. They don't know, okay, for the next 7 years, how many miles am I going to hike on, October 13th, 2027? We don't know. We don't know where you're going to stay. We don't know where you're going to sleep. We're just going to figure it out. We don't know how this product's necessarily going to make money, but we know that it's going to change people's lives, so we have to make it. And the entrepreneurs that have that attitude, they set out on the unknown like you did, without all of the answers, but knowing and confident that we'll find them along the way. And then a lot of times on the back end, we're on the middle of the journey, we have these big highs and these big lows, and a lot of times we're alone. Most people are not on this journey and haven't ever quite experienced the journey, or they're like us with our little walks compared to your big walk and be like, we're trying to understand. we're trying to understand what we're going through, but we can't. So most people in an entrepreneur's life can't quite understand the journey because it's so unique. And then on the end of it, it's like trying to say, okay, I'm going to set my company aside and go back to life with everyone else. That's a real challenge for a lot of people because it occupied their identity. It was everything that they were doing all day long for years and years and years. It was who they were. And now that's not there. Well, who am I if I don't have my company? Who am I if I can't walk? And that's a very difficult challenge. And I think when people don't decide ahead of time what that purpose is going to be, they can really become depressed. They can have a meaningless life, even if for so many years they had purpose. It's just gone.
Yeah, I mean, it can be very challenging, and to speak to the idea of beginning and not beginning, I think that is like such a powerful sticking point for the majority of people. Is they, in a certain way, they handle their life with too much care. They are afraid of failing or being uncomfortable. And really, when you do these big things, like when I was walking, that's basically just failure a million times every day. Especially in the beginning. I'm getting blisters. I'm losing toenails. I'm lost again. This is a terrible place to camp. I got the wrong paperwork. And it's just these million different things of failing over and over and over and over again. When you realize that you're going to fail no matter what, then you become much less afraid of beginning. And when you realize the failures, actually, that's the growth. That's the growth that's happening. And then you can accept it. But what helps in that is to have that clear goal that's set, and really that value-based goal that's set in the distance. And when you have that, then everything else just becomes in between. And the failures aren't really failures then. They're just sort of stepping stones and these opportunities for growth, for however like cliche that may sound, but that's how you grow, is that you fail.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've found that as well. I think that's a really good insight. I do a lot of traveling, and recently my wife and I traveled with some people who don't travel very often. And there are hiccups along the way. And it was just this difference in the anxiety level of my wife and I who had been through a lot of this stuff. Here's how we get a car. Oh, the flight's delayed. We'll do this. We'll do that. And these people that their anxiety level was high because they hadn't gone through those, as you said, those failures. They hadn't gone through and failed. I found that when I was hiking. I was like, oh, where am I going to hike? Where am I going to camp? Is the food going to last? Am I going to find water? And after a while, you're like, oh yeah, it'll be all right. You figure it out. And so I think you've got to go through that as business owners and try things and realize there's going to be those learnings. There's going to be those failures.
Yeah. And I think there's also this idea that there's like this end destination and that everything, you launch a new product or you have this new idea, whatever it is, and this is the final thing that's going to propel you to where you want to be. And really, it doesn't work like that. It's just another step. Yeah. And so nothing is really final in that way. It's just step after step after step after step after step. And you just have to be willing to, not put so much on one single step and be ready to fail and then try again.
Yeah. Both of you talk about ending long walks and kind of feeling disappointed or really wanting nothing more than to just keep walking. And anytime I've conquered a big goal in my life, I've felt the same way. And talking to other people, it seems like a really common theme because the goal isn't really what it's all about. It's what it takes to get to the goal. It's the journey toward that goal. That's what's meaningful is when I can wake up motivated by a goal. That's the purpose of the goal. It's not so I can get there. Whenever I did my first Ironman triathlon, I was like, oh, this is going to be like, I would daydream about crossing the finish line. Like, it's going to be awesome. Like, I'm going to just be jubilant. I'm going to practically be floating. I was like, I'd be practicing, like running around my neighborhood for a training session. I'd be like practicing my poses, like, oh, this is how I'm going to cross the finish line. I'm like, and when it comes and it's time for me to cross the finish line, like, I don't even like raise my arms. I didn't even clap. I just crossed like normal and went, all right, well,
I think you realize that sometimes the goal you set isn't really the goal. In other words, doing the Ironman, that seems like that's the goal, but that wasn't the goal. The goal is to become a person who could do an Ironman.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it was something broader than that.
Yeah. I think that there's a balance between having no goal at all. That's not good. Like, your business is going to fail if you have no goal. Your life is going to be sad if you have no goals. At the very least, it's not going to be what it could be. Putting all of our self-worth in the goal and focusing on the goal as the end outcome that defines us, that's not good either.
I think that goes to, in a certain way, what I was saying earlier with the values. And so the World Walk was just a way to fulfill those values. It wasn't so much about the walk itself, but it was this thing that was fulfilling how I wanted to live. So I think that's what becomes when you liberate yourself from the end result in a certain way. And even you sort of liberate yourself from all these other things, because when you know what you value, you know the things that you can do without. I knew I valued traveling. I valued adventure. So I knew I could live on rice and beans if that's what it came to, because I valued these other things.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest thing you learned on that whole journey?
I would say there's a bunch of things, and it's I could go on, but I would say the one that maybe is least understood in a certain way, or that is least common, is just how small people are. And what I mean by that is that we have this idea that we control our own destiny, especially in America, and that willpower and drive and motivation and all these things are going to see us through our lives, and we'll have control over our lives, and that we're going to be able to fulfill all our dreams. But I met a lot of people on the road that were much smarter than I was, that were much more driven than I was, that were much more creative than I was. And it's a guy selling gasoline to passing trucks in Peru, or it's a guy sharpening knives in Algeria, or it's a woman in Turkey selling fruit. And it doesn't matter how driven they are, how creative they are. You still exist within your circumstances. And I think the circumstances are so enormous. Geography, culture, politics, the economics, all these things are so enormous that we don't realize that they're even there anymore. And they're difficult to notice. And it's also probably not entirely productive to say that, well, I don't control anything. It's important to feel some control. It's important to have drive. But also there's this great liberation that comes with knowing basically you don't control any of your life. And the reason I was able to walk around the world is because I was born in a wealthy part of the country, in the wealthiest country in the world with an American passport. And my friend happened to die at 17. And then I was happened to get this sponsor. And if all those things hadn't happened, I wouldn't be walking around the world. If I was born in Algeria, I'd probably be a Muslim. If I was born in China, I would probably be an atheist. If I was born wherever it is, all these circumstances come into play. And so I would say that was probably the most important lesson, and the least understood lesson is just people are really, really, really tiny.
What do you think is your biggest top decision-making tip for business owners?
The top decision-making tip for business owners, I would say, is making sure that it aligns with your flag in a certain way. I think it's important to set some aim, some concrete measure, and not a goal, but set some flag. I use this example in my talk, which is Amazon. When Jeff Bezos founded Amazon, he wanted to be the most customer-centric company on the planet. That was their flag, one of the flags. And when you have a flag like that, it enables you to measure every decision within a company, within a life, against that flag. And you go, does this get us closer or further from it? And so I think if you can have a clear sense of what you're aiming towards, it makes the path much clearer.
Thanks, Tom. Where can people connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's Tom Turcich, TURCICH.com, or probably easiest is The World Walk on Instagram. Have the book coming out, the memoir coming out October 8th. You can order that. It's called The World Walk. And that's probably it. That'll do.
I take away from talking with Tom is just how closely going on a transformational experience like a long hike around the world aligns with business owner experience. You have to know sort of who you are, what your values are. You have to know where you're starting from, what you're wanting to accomplish. And the big thing that he shared was around the adaptability that has to be there. And that's with business owners. You have to be able to change your campsite. You have to be able to deal with the adversities that come up, human or otherwise. And so it was just really just that alignment. And so it really struck me that the more we go out and do things like that, press the game, go on long journeys, go on long transformational experiences, the better we will be as business owners because we will have that adaptability and those learnings that we can transfer.
My biggest takeaway is the idea that I can control everything in my own life. He said that's very much an American idea, and it's in some ways helpful, but not always is it helpful. And it's okay to kind of surrender some of that control to God and say, hey, I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know how I'm going to get through it, but I know that I'm moving in the right direction.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram at decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Sean's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.